The sun over Cedar Ridge wasn't just hot, it was mean. It beat down on the dusty plaza like a hammer on an anvil, punishing the cracked earth until it begged for mercy. Cowboys leaned against hitching posts, their faces hidden under dusty hats, looking for all the world like they were part of the scenery. But they were watching. Everybody in Cedar Ridge was always watching. It was the kind of afternoon where the only thing that moved fast was the gossip. And then she walked into the square. Martha Coleman. The name itself was a story in this town. Tall, with skin the color of rich soil, and a back that had never learned how to bend. She carried a leather satchel full of herbs and roots, the tools of the mountain medicine woman. When your kid was burning with fever, you called her a saint. When you saw her in the street, you whispered she was something else entirely. She stopped dead in the center of the plaza, letting the whispers and the snickers wash over her like a dirty creek. Her eyes, sharp and dark, scanned the men lounging outside the saloon. They were the usual vultures, ranch hands paid by the town's puppet master, Mayor Aldrich. They preened and postured, but Martha's gaze passed right over them. It landed on a man who didn't belong. He was a drifter, sitting on the saloon steps, away from the others. Trail dust was caked on his boots, and his clothes spoke of 1,000 hard miles. He was quiet, but his quiet was louder than all the other men's jeering combined. His hand rested near the butt of a Colt revolver, not in a threatening way, but in a familiar way, like it was a part of him. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't sneered. He just watched her, and that was all the sign she needed. Martha took a deep breath, the kind you take before you jump off a cliff, and she walked straight for him. The noise in the plaza just stopped. Every eye was locked on the mountain woman and the stranger. She stopped 3 feet from him, so close he had to tilt his head back to look up at her. Her voice cut through the thick, hot air. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. You, tonight, you're coming to my bed. The silence didn't just break. It exploded. A wave of raw, ugly laughter crashed through the square. Men howled, slapping their knees, their grins looking predatory in the harsh sunlight. A whistle cut through the air, sharp and mocking. Somebody shouted something foul, something that made the women on the street hurry their children along. But the stranger, the drifter, he didn't laugh. His eyes, the color of a coming storm, stayed locked on hers. He wasn't looking at a joke. He was looking at a puzzle. He saw the tremble she was trying to hide in her hands, the desperation she was trying to mask with boldness. He saw the cold, hard calculation burning behind her eyes. This wasn't a proposition. This was a gambit. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried across the now quiet plaza. "That's a mighty bold declaration for a Sunday afternoon." He was waiting for the punchline, but there wasn't one. "I'm not proposing anything improper," Martha said, her chin lifting, her voice ringing with a strength that defied the mockery. "I need a husband, legal and proper, and you look like the kind of man who listens to reason before he listens to the fools laughing behind you." The laughter died in their throats. This wasn't about lust. This was about power. In a town like Cedar Ridge, a marriage certificate could be worth more than a deed. It could mean the difference between holding on and being wiped off the map entirely. The air crackled. This was real. The stranger rose from the steps. He unfolded in one smooth, fluid motion, and suddenly he was taller than her, his shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. He wasn't just a drifter. He was a presence. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture of respect that silenced the last of the whispers. "Most folks call me Sam," he said. His eyes never left hers. "Samuel Hawkins, and you're Martha Coleman." "My father was Josiah Coleman," she stated, not with pride but as a fact that mattered. Recognition flickered in Sam's eyes. You couldn't be in this part of the country and not know that name. Josiah Coleman, a freedman who came west with nothing but grit and a dream. He'd bought 1,200 acres of mountain land nobody wanted, and found it glittering with silver. He'd built an empire where everyone said it was impossible, an empire whose owner had died 3 months ago, under circumstances people still whispered about. "I heard of your father," Sam said, his voice cautious. "Heard his holdings might be in some trouble." Martha let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Trouble's one word for it. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a folded paper, the official court seal catching the light like a warning flare. The court says I have 30 days to marry, or I forfeit every last acre my father bled for. 23 of those days are already gone. Sam's eyes narrowed. He was putting the pieces together now. I heard there were suitors, 3 of them. Gone, Martha said flatly. The first discovered a sudden calling for the goldfields in California. The second remembered some long-lost family back east. The third, she paused, her voice hardening. The third was honest enough to admit someone paid him handsomely to disappear. Sam's gaze turned to stone. Someone like Mayor Aldrich. She didn't have to answer. The silence was a confession. Everyone knew Mayor Aldrich owned half the town and had a greedy eye on the other half. He'd been circling her father's land for years, patient as a vulture, just waiting for him to fall. And now he was circling her. So why me? Sam finally asked. The question hung in the air, the most important question of all. You don't know the first thing about me. I know you've been in town for 3 days, she shot back, her words like bullets. I know Aldrich tried to hire you for his cattle drives, and you turned his money down. That tells me you're not his man. I know you sit quiet while other men make fools of themselves. My father taught me how to read a man's character, Mr. Hawkins. And right now you're the only book in this town worth reading. The crowd was so close now they could feel the heat coming off them. The whole town was frozen, waiting for his answer. What's the offer? Sam asked, his voice low. A partnership, Martha said, her voice ringing with conviction. A marriage in name only, legal and binding. I keep my land. You get 20% of all silver profits from the mine, a roof over your head and a stake to build your own future. And after 1 year, if you choose, we dissolve it. Clean, no strings. You walk away a rich man. The offer was staggering, life-changing, a fortune for a year's work. And if I say no? Sam asked, testing her. For just a second, the iron wall of her composure cracked. Her shoulders sagged, and he saw the terrifying weight she was carrying. Then just as quickly, she straightened, the fire returning to her eyes. Then in 7 days, Mayor Aldrich takes everything. The land my father built, the silver he found, the house my mother died in, and I'll be left with nothing, knowing I failed because I wasn't brave enough to ask a stranger for help. The plaza was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop in the dust. Every man, woman, and child was waiting. Sam took off his hat, running a hand through his trail-worn hair. His stormy eyes never left hers. He could have laughed in her face. He could have turned his back and walked away, and no one would have blamed him. He owed her nothing, but he didn't. Instead, his voice came out quiet, but steady. Judge Peters rides circuit through here on Tuesday. We could do it then. Hope flared in Martha's chest, bright and hot. Tomorrow morning? Tonight, Sam interrupted, his voice cutting through her relief with cold precision. Reverend Mills can marry us tonight. If we're going to do this, we do it before Aldrich or his cronies have time to make another move. We do it now. Martha stared at him, stunned into silence. You mean it? I don't say things I don't mean, Sam said. Then in a gesture that shocked the entire town, he offered her his arm. The gesture was formal, gentlemanly, a stark contrast to the raw, desperate deal they had just made. Shall we, Mrs. Hawkins? A collective gasp went through the crowd. Martha hesitated for only a single, thundering heartbeat. Then she placed her hand on his arm. The fabric of his coat was rough, but the arm beneath it was solid as mountain rock. Together they turned and walked toward the church, the entire town parting before them like the Red Sea. From behind the dusty window of the mayor's office, a face twisted in rage watched them go. Sam leaned in, his voice a low whisper only she could hear. He's not going to take this lying down. I know, Martha whispered back, her hand tightening on his arm. That's why I chose a man who wears a gun. The little church on the edge of Cedar Ridge smelled of old wood and beeswax. It was a simple place, with plain glass windows that caught the last of the sun's dying light, making the dust motes dance in the air like tiny ghosts. For most, it was a house of God. For Martha Coleman, tonight it was a fortress. Sam pushed the creaking door open, the sound echoing in the empty hall. Reverend Mills, a man who looked like he was held together by prayer and wire, looked up from his Bible. His eyes widened when he saw them. "Martha? Mr. Hawkins?" he said, his voice thin with confusion. "What brings you here at this hour?" "We need to be married, Reverend," Martha said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Tonight." The Reverend blinked, his placid world thrown into chaos. "Tonight? My dear, that's highly irregular. The church requires a period of counseling, of prayerful consideration." "Reverend," Sam cut in, his voice polite but with an edge of steel that made the old man flinch. "Time is a luxury we don't have. Mayor Aldrich will find a way to stop this by morning. We need this knot tied before he can find a way to cut it." The minister looked from Martha's fierce, determined face to Sam's calm, watchful one. He saw the desperation, but he also saw something else. A partnership already forged in fire. He let out a long, weary sigh that seemed to deflate him. "Very well," he conceded, "but you'll need witnesses. The law requires it." "I have two," Martha said, a flicker of a smile touching her lips for the first time that day. An hour later, the small vestibule was no longer empty. Mrs. Chen, the town's laundress, stood with her back straight, her gray hair pulled into a tight, severe knot. She had faced down 20 years of hardship in Cedar Ridge and carried herself with the quiet dignity of a survivor. Beside her stood Pete Winters, a grizzled old prospector with a bad limp and eyes as sharp as newly mined steel. His gnarled hand rested on a heavy walking stick. "You sure about this, Martha girl?" Pete rasped, his eyes full of a gruff affection. "Marriage ain't a game of cards you can just walk away from." "I'm sure, Pete," she answered, her voice soft but firm. "Papa always said, when the mountain traps you between a rock slide and a cliff, you don't wait for a path, you make one." Mrs. Chen took Martha's hands in her own, her grip surprisingly strong. "Your father would be proud," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He was a good man. You have his fire. You fight smart, like him." The ceremony was short, the words stark and simple in the flickering candlelight. Martha had expected it to feel like a business transaction, a contract signed before God instead of a notary. But as Sam took her hand, his palm rough and calloused against hers, a strange warmth spread through her chest. It was a feeling she hadn't anticipated, a feeling that felt dangerously close to hope. "Do you, Samuel James Hawkins, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the Reverend intoned, his voice trembling slightly. "I do," Sam said, his voice clear and steady, without a trace of hesitation. "And do you, Martha Grace Coleman, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Martha heard herself say, her own voice stronger than she expected. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." A small collective sigh of relief came from their two witnesses. Martha felt a blush creep up her neck. She met her new husband's gaze. "Mrs. Hawkins," he said softly, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Mr. Hawkins," she replied, the name feeling foreign and yet strangely fitting on her tongue. They had just finished signing the register, the ink still wet on the page, when the church door slammed open with a deafening crash. Jake Morrison, the doctor's brother and Aldrich's brutish foreman, filled the doorway. Three of his hired thugs stood behind him, their silhouettes dark and menacing against the twilight. Morrison's eyes gleamed with a greasy malice. "Well, well, heard there was a wedding?" he sneered, his voice dripping with false cheer. "Funny, I don't recall getting an invitation." Before anyone could react, Sam moved. He wasn't fast, he was instant. One moment he was beside Martha, the next he was a shield in front of her, his hand hovering over the butt of his Colt. "It was a private ceremony," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Family only." Morrison let out a harsh, ugly laugh that desecrated the holy space. "Family? A half-breed mountain witch? A drifter? A Chinese washerwoman? And a broken-down old gold-scratcher? That's what you call family, Martha?" Pete Winter's grip tightened on his walking stick, the knuckles on his hand turning white. "It's better than a family of snakes and backstabbers," he growled. The sneer on Morrison's face vanished, replaced by a flash of rage. His hand twitched towards his own revolver. The air in the church grew thick, heavy with the promise of blood and gun smoke. The candles seemed to flicker, casting long, dancing shadows that looked like specters of death. Then Sam's voice cut through the tension, cold and sharp as a razor. "You draw that iron in a house of God, Morrison," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it echoed off the walls. "And you'd best be prepared to meet your maker right here on this floor." The threat was absolute. It wasn't a boast. It was a promise. Everyone in the room, everyone in the town, knew that a man like Sam Hawkins didn't make promises he couldn't keep. Morrison's hand froze. His face was a mask of fury, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. He was a bully, not a gunfighter. He knew he was outmatched. Finally, he raised his hands in a gesture of mock surrender, the sneer returning to his face. "Easy, Hawkins. Just came to deliver a message from the mayor." He pulled a thick envelope from his coat pocket and tossed it onto a nearby pew. It landed with a soft, ominous thud. "Seems your dearly departed father wasn't as savvy as everyone thought," Morrison gloated. "He borrowed heavily against future silver profits. Those debts have just been called in, due at the end of the week, or the land is forfeit." Martha snatched the envelope, her hands trembling as she tore it open. She scanned the documents, her face growing paler with every line. Her jaw clenched so hard it was a wonder her teeth didn't crack. "Lies," she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "My father never borrowed a cent from Aldrich. He hated him. These are forgeries." Sam placed a steadying hand on her arm. "Then we'll prove it," he said, his voice a calm anchor in her storm. "But not here. Not tonight." Morrison backed out of the church, his thugs following close behind. His parting shot was aimed directly at Sam. "You tied yourself to a sinking ship, Hawkins. I surely hope she was worth it." The sound of their horses' hooves faded into the night. Sam didn't take his eyes off the empty doorway until he was sure they were gone. Only then did he turn to Martha. His storm-gray eyes were grim. "This is just the beginning," he said quietly. "Aldrich won't stop. He'll throw everything he has at us." Martha straightened her spine, the fear and rage in her eyes hardening into pure, unyielding resolve. "Then neither will I," she declared, her voice ringing with the strength of her ancestors. "My father's legacy will not be stolen, not while I still draw breath." Sam looked at her, at the fire burning in her soul. This woman, his wife, stood as fierce and defiant as any gunfighter he'd ever known. A deep, grudging respect took root in him. "You realize what you've done, don't you?" he asked. "Yes," she said simply, her eyes meeting his. "I've started a war." And there, under the flickering candles of the lonely church, surrounded by their small, loyal band of outcasts, Martha and Samuel Hawkins prepared to face the storm. The night after the wedding, the wind howled through the pines like a banshee, as if the mountains themselves knew what was coming. Sam didn't sleep. He sat in the small, dusty bunkhouse, a lantern casting a pool of yellow light on the table. Both of his Colts were disassembled before him, their components laid out with surgical precision. He cleaned and oiled each part with a slow, methodical calm that was more unsettling than any outburst of anger. A man like Aldrich didn't take a loss gracefully. He'd retaliate, and it would be swift and ugly. At dawn, a thin ribbon of smoke was already curling from the chimney of Martha's cabin. She was on the porch when Sam approached, a rifle slung over her shoulder, her eyes methodically scanning the tree line. She stood like a soldier on watch, but Sam could see the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the steel in her posture holding back a bone-deep weariness. "You didn't rest," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'll rest when my father's land is safe," she replied, her voice tight. "And not a moment before." Before Sam could respond, the acrid smell of smoke, sharp and unnatural, hit his nostrils. It wasn't wood smoke. It was the smell of something burning that shouldn't be. His head snapped toward the supply shed, the small building where Martha kept her precious herbs and remedies. Thin, greedy tongues of orange flame were licking at the roof. "Fire!" Sam roared, his body exploding into motion. He sprinted across the yard with the desperate speed of a man who knew fire was the devil's favorite tool on the frontier. Martha was already there, a bucket in hand, her face a mask of grim determination. They worked in a frantic, unspoken rhythm, a chaotic ballet against the flames. She drew water from the barrel, he threw it. The smoke stung their eyes and choked their lungs, their arms screaming with the effort. Sam scrambled onto the burning roof, using a soaked blanket to beat back the encroaching flames, each slap sending a shower of angry sparks into the morning sky. By the time the sun was fully risen, the fire was out, but the cost was high. Half the shed was a blackened, skeletal ruin. The air stank of charcoal and defeat. It was deliberate, Sam muttered, his voice a low growl. He crouched by a scorched wallboard, his fingers tracing the char. He touched the damp soil beneath it, then held up his hand. It glistened with an oily sheen. Coal oil. They soaked the wall. Martha knelt beside him, her hands sifting through the gray ash of what used to be her life's work. Broken glass jars, charred roots, the ghosts of 3 months of painstakingly gathered supplies. Willow bark for fevers, she whispered, her voice cracking. Yarrow for wounds. The whole town will suffer for this. That's the point, Sam said, his gaze hardening into chips of ice. Aldrich wants to cripple you. He wants to show the town you can't protect them, that you can't even protect yourself. His eyes, trained to see details others missed, caught something in the soft dirt near the shed's foundation. Boot prints, deep and clear in the damp earth. And one was distinctive. The left heel was worn down on the outside edge, causing the owner to roll his foot slightly as he walked. Morrison, Sam said, the name coming out like a curse. I'd bet my life on it. Can you prove it? Martha asked, looking up from the ruins of her work, the fire in her eyes hotter than the one that had just been extinguished. Sam rose to his feet, his hands settling on the butt of his Colt. Maybe not in one of Aldrich's courts, he said with a cold, grim smile, but we can send a message. By mid-morning, the news had already slithered through Cedar Ridge. Whispers followed Sam and Martha as they rode into town, their faces smudged with soot, their eyes hard with purpose. They didn't stop until they were in front of the boarding house where Morrison took his meals. Sam swung down from his horse, his long coat sweeping back to reveal the tied-down holsters on his thighs. Wait here, he told Martha. She dismounted too, her rifle in her hand, her chin jutting out in defiance. Like hell I will. A flicker of a smile touched Sam's lips. All right, but stay behind me. They kicked open the door to the dining room. Morrison was at a table with 3 of his goons, stuffing his face with eggs and bacon. He looked up, his mouth full, his eyes widening in surprise as Sam strode forward and without a word, kicked the table clean over. Plates, coffee, and food crashed to the floor in a greasy mess. That, Sam growled, his voice rumbling with controlled fury, was for the fire. Morrison scrambled to his feet, his hand flashing towards his gun, but he never had a chance. Sam's Colt was already in his hand, the draw a blur of motion too fast for the eye to follow. The black, unblinking eye of the barrel was pointed directly between Morrison's eyes. The hammer was cocked, the click echoing like a death knell in the silent room. You got proof? Morrison spat, his face turning a blotchy purple, a mixture of rage and terror. Boot prints, Sam said calmly. The smell of coal oil, and 2 witnesses who saw you buying a full can of it yesterday afternoon. He was bluffing about the witnesses, but Morrison didn't know that. More than enough proof for me. One of Morrison's men started to rise. That's when Martha stepped forward, the barrel of her rifle leveled at the man's chest. Her voice was sharp and cold as a winter wind. Sit down, unless you want to be remembered as the man who died for Jake Morrison's breakfast. The man froze, then slowly sank back into his chair. Morrison's lip curled into a desperate sneer. You can't do this, Hawkins. You can't just... $50. Sam cut him off, his voice flat. You're going to reach into your pocket, real slow, and you're going to put $50 on what's left of this table. Payment for damages. $50? Are you insane? The barrel of Sam's Colt seemed to press forward, a fraction of an inch, without moving at all. 60, Sam corrected, his voice as calm as if he were ordering a drink. Morrison's hand trembled as he dug into his pocket, pulling out a wad of bills. He slapped them onto the floor amidst the broken eggs. His eyes burned with a venomous, impotent hatred. This isn't over, Hawkins. No, Sam agreed, slowly lowering the hammer on his Colt, though he didn't holster it. It's just getting started, but next time you have a problem with my wife, you come to me, face to face. Only cowards sneak around in the dark. They walked out of the boarding house, the money in hand, leaving Morrison and his men stewing in their own humiliation. The eyes of everyone on the street followed them, a mixture of fear and a newfound dangerous respect. Back on the boardwalk, Martha let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Was that necessary? Sam finished for her. He tucked the crumpled bills into her satchel. Aldrich and his dogs only understand one language. We just spoke it. But this was just the opening shot. As they walked down the street, they passed the general store. Thomas Garrett, one of the suitors who had mysteriously vanished, was inside, his hands trembling as he tried to stock shelves that were nearly bare. Aldrich's freight rates bleeding you dry? Martha asked gently. Garrett nodded, shame and fear warring in his eyes. He's choking us all out, Martha. Anyone who ever showed you a kindness. He's trying to turn the whole town into his personal kingdom. Sam's gaze swept over the worried faces peering out from behind dusty shop windows. This wasn't just about Martha's land anymore. It was about all of them. What if there was another way, he said, his voice thoughtful. Another freight line, one that offered fair rates to everyone. Garrett looked at him like he'd just suggested they could fly. You'd need a fortune. You'd need protection. Aldrich would crush you. Then we'll find them, Martha said, her voice filled with a certainty she didn't entirely feel. The story of the showdown in the dining room spread through Cedar Ridge like a prairie fire. Hawkins had faced Morrison down and made him pay. And the mountain woman had been right there with him, rifle at the ready. For the first time, some people looked at them, not with suspicion, but with a flicker of hope. But hope is a dangerous thing in a town built on fear. Late that afternoon, a commotion drew them toward the center of town. A crowd had gathered. In the middle of it was Mrs. Chen, standing defiantly over her overturned laundry basket. Her clean folded linens were scattered in the dust. Surrounding her were Morrison and his thugs. New town ordinance, Morrison sneered, holding up a piece of paper. Passed by the council this morning. No foreign businesses operating within town limits. You're a health hazard, old woman, spreading your diseases. Mrs. Chen's chin lifted. I have lived in this town 20 years, she said, her voice shaking but proud. I was washing this town's clothes when you were still a dirty-faced boy, Jake Morrison. Morrison grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in cruelly. Time for you to go, Mrs. Chen cried out, a sound of pain and outrage that was cut short as Sam's hand clamped down on Morrison's wrist like a vice. He twisted, a single, controlled movement that brought the bigger man to his knees, his face contorted in agony. The lady said no, Sam said, his voice like chips of granite. And as for your ordinance, a town council vote requires a quorum. When did this meeting happen? Last night, Morrison gasped, struggling against Sam's grip. Emergency session. Funny, Martha said sharply, kneeling to help Mrs. Chen gather her scattered laundry. An emergency that only 3 people knew about. You, Mayor Aldrich, and Hutchins, the banker. The 3 men who stand to gain the most by driving honest folk out of their homes. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. They had all felt Aldrich's squeeze. They all knew the truth of her words. This meeting is over, Morrison barked, trying to regain control. No, Martha said, stepping up onto the saloon porch, her voice ringing out, clear and strong, for all to hear. This meeting is just beginning. There will be a town meeting. Tonight, 7 o'clock, right here. Any property owner who has a grievance with the way this town is run, you come and you speak your piece. We'll decide together what kind of town we want Cedar Ridge to be. A town for all of us, or a town for one greedy man. You can't do that, Morrison howled, cradling his wrist. You can't just call a meeting. She can, Sam said, his grip still locked on Morrison. Territorial statute. Any gathering of a dozen or more property owners can petition for a town hall. Now, who here owns land? Hands shot up across the crowd. Not just a dozen, dozens. The storekeeper, the blacksmith, the ranchers, the prospectors. The tide was turning. You could feel it in the air. Morrison finally yanked his arm free, his face a thundercloud of black fury. This isn't over, he snarled, backing away. No, it's not, Martha said, the setting sun glinting off the barrel of her rifle. It's just beginning. The morning sun beat down, but the air in Cedar Ridge was thick with a tension you could taste. The town was no longer sleeping. It was waiting for the other shoe to drop. People gathered in small, anxious knots, whispering about the fire, about the showdown, about the town meeting that was now only hours away. The silence that had ruled for so long was shattering, and no one knew what would be left in its place. 3 days after the fire, it shattered completely. Sam was walking the fence line at the edge of Martha's property when he heard it, a sound that cuts through any other, the raw, terrified scream of a mother. He didn't hesitate. He ran, his boots pounding the hard-packed earth, his instincts screaming that Aldrich had made his next move. He burst into the town square to find a circle of people, their faces pale with horror. In the center, Martha was already there, kneeling in the dust. Before her lay a small boy, his little chest heaving, each breath a desperate, gasping struggle. "It's Timothy Johnson," someone whispered. "Doc Morrison was just here. Said the boy won't make it through the night." The boy was on fire with fever, his skin a deathly pale, his lips tinged with blue. His mother was clutching at Martha's sleeve, her face a mess of tears and hopeless pleas. "Please," she sobbed. "The doctor said it's God's will, but he's my only boy. I can't just let him die." Martha's jaw was a hard, tight line. She gently pulled back the boy's shirt, her expert eyes scanning the faint rash, the unnatural rise and fall of his ribs. "This isn't scarlet fever," she murmured, her mind working with lightning speed. "It's not typhoid." She looked up at the weeping mother. "He plays near the old abandoned mine shafts, doesn't he?" The mother nodded frantically, a wild hope dawning in her eyes. "Yes, all the time." "Mine fever," Martha said with absolute certainty. "The bad air settles in the low places. His lungs are filling. He's drowning." She looked up, her eyes finding Sam in the crowd. "Sam, my kit from the root cellar. The one with the sulfur and the willow bark. Hurry." But before Sam could move, a voice cold and imperious sliced through the crowd. "That will be enough." Mayor Aldrich strode forward, parting the crowd like a king. At his side was Doc Morrison, looking smug and vindicated. Two burly deputies followed in their wake. Aldrich's polished boots were the only clean things in the dusty square. "This woman," he announced, his voice booming with false authority, "is not a doctor. She has no license, no formal training. If she so much as touches that child again, she will be arrested for breaking the laws of this territory." Martha didn't even look at him. She looked at the dying boy. "And you would rather he die in front of his mother," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "just to protect your cousin's fragile pride?" A collective gasp went through the crowd. The connection between the Morrisons and Aldrich was an open secret, but no one had ever dared to say it aloud. The mayor's smile was thin and cruel. "This is a matter of law and order, Mrs. Hawkins. Dr. Morrison is the town's appointed medical authority. If he says the boy cannot be saved, then we must accept it as God's will." The boy's mother collapsed at Aldrich's feet, clutching at the hem of his fine coat. "Please, sir, I'm begging you. Let her try. I will pay anything." Aldrich pulled his coat away, as if her grief were contagious. "Your sorrow is making you hysterical, Mrs. Johnson. The law is the law." That's when Sam's voice rumbled through the crowd, low and steady as an earthquake. "Funny thing about laws, Mayor. They don't mean a damn thing if the people who have to live under them don't believe in them." He pushed his way to Martha's side, holding out the heavy leather satchel he'd fetched while Aldrich was pontificating. He raised his voice for all to hear. "And these people believe in her." The murmuring started then, quiet at first, but growing in volume. It came from the people who had lost parents and children to Doc Morrison's incompetence. It came from the mothers who had used Martha's healing teas to soothe a colicky baby when the doctor's expensive tonics had failed. It came from the miners whose broken bones she had set better than any so-called doctor. "Let her try," a man shouted from the back. Then another voice joined in. "Let her try." Soon it was a chant, a roar of defiance that washed over the square. "Let her try! Let her try!" The deputies shifted on their feet, their hands on their guns, but their eyes were uncertain. They wouldn't dare try to arrest her in front of this mob. Aldrich's face was a mask of thunderous rage. His power was slipping through his fingers like sand, and he knew it. If she lays a hand on that boy, he seethed, I will see her hang. Martha looked up from Timothy's pale, sweating face, her dark eyes locking with the mayor's. Then you'd better bring your rope, she said, her voice ringing with contempt, because you can arrest me right after I save his life. And without waiting for another word, she tore open her satchel. She worked with a focused intensity that silenced the crowd. She crumbled a yellow sulfurous powder into a cup of water, mixing it into a paste. Hold him upright, she commanded the mother. Gently now. She spooned the mixture between the boy's blue lips. She laid cool, damp cloths on his forehead, her hands moving with a sureness that was mesmerizing to watch. This is witchcraft, Doc Morrison blustered, his face red with fury. She'll kill him. But no one was listening to him anymore. Every eye was on the small boy in his mother's arms. The minutes stretched out, each one an eternity. The only sound was the boy's ragged breathing and his mother's whispered prayers. Then a flicker. The boy's eyelids fluttered. His chest seemed to lift, just a little easier. The rasping in his lungs softened. Breath by slow, painful breath, the blue tint faded from his lips, replaced by a pale pink. His eyes opened. Mama, he whispered, his voice weak as a kitten's mew. Sarah Johnson let out a sob that was half pain, half joy, clutching her son to her chest as if she would never let him go. And the crowd erupted. A wave of cheers and shouts washed over the square. Men threw their hats in the air. Women wept with relief. Someone clapped Sam on the back so hard he staggered. She did it! The mountain woman saved him. Martha rose to her feet, her face slick with sweat, her body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. He isn't safe yet, she announced, her voice carrying over the din. He needs constant care for the next 3 days. But he will live. Across the sea of celebrating townspeople, Sam's eyes met Aldrich's. The mayor's face was a terrifying mask of controlled hatred. You going to arrest a woman for performing a miracle in front of half the town, Mayor? Sam called out, his voice laced with mocking challenge. Aldrich's lips were a thin, white line. He forced a smile that didn't reach his cold, dead eyes. The circuit judge will be here in a week, he said, his voice dangerously soft. We'll let a real man of the law decide what's a miracle and what's a crime. He turned on his heel and stormed away, Doc Morrison and his deputies scrambling to keep up. The people of Cedar Ridge swarmed Martha, their hands reaching out to touch her, their voices a chorus of thanks and desperate pleas. My daughter has a cough that won't leave. My husband's back, it pains him something awful. Can you look at my baby, Martha, please? Sam leaned in close, his mouth next to her ear. You just kicked the hornet's nest with both feet, he murmured. They'll come to you for everything now. They'll abandon Morrison completely. Aldrich will never, ever forgive you for this. Martha watched the retreating back of the mayor, her chin held high, her eyes burning with a righteous fire. Then let him come, she said. My papa always said that sunlight is the best cure for rot. The more he pushes, the more of his darkness will drag into the light. Sam looked at her, at this incredible, unbreakable woman who was now his wife. A fierce pride swelled in his chest. She wasn't just fighting for her land anymore. She was fighting for the soul of this town. But in the shadows of the alley across the street, he saw Jake Morrison whispering with a pair of hard-faced men, the kind of men who carried guns for a living. And from his office window high above the square, he could feel the cold, calculating glare of Mayor Aldrich. The battle for Timothy Johnson's life had been won, but the war for Cedar Ridge had just begun. The day Judge Theodore Carter was due to arrive, a strange quiet fell over Cedar Ridge. It wasn't the old quiet of fear, but the tense silence of a town holding its breath. People lined the street, their faces a mixture of hope and dread. They all knew this was it. This was the final battle. Aldrich's money and influence against Martha's truth. The judge who rode into town was not what they expected. He was older, with a mane of silver hair, and a face that looked like it had been carved from the mountains themselves. But his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. And at his side rode a federal marshal, his silver badge a stark and official warning. That detail alone sent a fresh wave of whispers through the crowd. Federal law had come to Cedar Ridge. For the first time in his life, Mayor Aldrich looked nervous. The town hall was packed so tight you couldn't breathe. Every soul who could walk or be carried was there. Judge Carter banged his gavel, the sound like a crack of thunder. This court is now in session. We are here to hear charges brought by Mayor Thaddeus Aldrich against Mrs. Martha Hawkins concerning the legitimacy of her marriage, the deed to her father's land, and the practice of unlicensed medicine. Aldrich rose, smooth and confident as a rattlesnake. Your Honor, this woman is a charlatan. She entrapped a drifter in a sham marriage to circumvent the law and hold on to property that was never legally hers. She endangers the good people of this town with her primitive witchcraft, and her father's deed, he held up a yellowed piece of paper, is a forgery. The ink is barely dry. A parade of Aldrich's cronies took the stand, telling tales of Martha brewing strange potions under the full moon and whispering curses. Doc Morrison puffed out his chest and declared her remedies to be poison, boasting of his own 6 months of formal medical training in St. Louis. The judge arched a silver eyebrow. 6 months, you say? Fascinating. Then it was Sam's turn. He rose slowly, his presence filling the room. Your Honor, our marriage is no sham. I took vows before God, and I have defended my wife with my life. Out here on the frontier, that's as real as it gets. He then gestured to the crowd. As for her healing, there's a boy in this room who is alive today because of her. Let his mother speak. Sarah Johnson walked to the front, her son Timothy clutching her hand. Her voice was simple and powerful. Doc Morrison told me to start digging a grave, she said, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Hawkins gave me back my son. A roar of approval went through the room. Then Martha stood. Her voice was steady as a river. Your Honor, my father's deed is no forgery. He bought that land with his Union Army pay, fair and square. She then looked directly at the judge, her gaze unwavering. And you, sir, should know, because you were there. You signed the original deed as a witness 15 years ago, when you were just a circuit lawyer. My father found you half dead from mountain fever and nursed you back to health. You told him then that a man who could save a life deserved the chance to build one. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. The judge's face went pale, a flicker of a long-buried memory in his eyes. He looked from Martha to the deed in his hand, then back to Martha. Aldrich started to protest, his face turning purple. But before he could speak, another voice cut through the air. Enough lies! A thin, nervous-looking man pushed his way to the front. He was a stranger. My name is Harold Colley, he said, his hands shaking. I'm a chemist from Denver. For the last 2 years, Mayor Aldrich has been paying me to supply him with certain compounds. His voice dropped to a horrified whisper. Slow-acting poisons, mercury salts, arsenic. The federal marshal's hand dropped to his revolver. Josiah Coleman was not the first, the chemist choked out, tears rolling down his face. Aldrich has been systematically removing anyone who stood in his way. I have letters, payment records, I have it all. Aldrich's face collapsed. The color drained from it, leaving it a pasty grayish white. He looked like a dead man. Judge Carter's gavel slammed down with the force of an executioner's axe. Marshal! Arrest Mayor Aldrich and Dr. Morrison on suspicion of fraud, conspiracy, and murder. Chaos erupted. Morrison shrieked and babbled. Aldrich screamed about lies and conspiracies as the marshal slapped iron cuffs on his wrists. The people of Cedar Ridge exploded, cheering, stomping their feet, their voices a single, unified roar of triumph. When the noise finally died down, Judge Carter looked at Martha and Sam. Your marriage is hereby declared valid. The Coleman land claim is secure. He paused, looking out at the faces of all the people she had helped. And as for the practice of medicine, this court finds no crime has been committed. Until the territory sees fit to write new laws, Mrs. Hawkins is free to continue her work. The gavel fell one last time. Case dismissed. Martha's knees gave out. Sam caught her, his strong arms holding her up. The crowd swarmed them, patting Sam on the back, hugging Martha, their faces shining with tears and gratitude. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. She turned to Sam, her voice thick with emotion. It's over. Sam looked at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. The legal fight is over, he corrected gently. But Aldrich's cronies are still out there. They won't go down without a fight. He looked out at the hopeful faces of the townspeople. The real work, the work of building this town into what it's supposed to be, that starts right now. Martha looked from his steady, storm-gray eyes to the faces of her friends, her community. The fear was gone, replaced by a fragile but fierce hope. She lifted her chin, the fire returning. Then we'll build it together, she said, stronger than it was before. Sam's smile widened. His eyes, for the first time, were not stormy, but warm. Partners, he said. Always. But outside, in the alley behind the town hall, Jake Morrison was gathering the last of Aldrich's loyal men, and he was giving them one final desperate order. The judge and the marshal are taking him on the morning coach. They will not make it out of these mountains alive. The morning after the trial was supposed to be a new dawn for Cedar Ridge. The air felt cleaner, the sun brighter. But Sam Hawkins knew better. Justice was a signature on a piece of paper. Vengeance was a bullet in the back. He stood on the porch of Martha's cabin, the scent of pine and damp earth in the air, and watched the town below. He wasn't admiring the view. He was watching for shadows. He'd seen the look in Jake Morrison's eyes as Aldrich was dragged away. It wasn't the look of a defeated man. It was the look of a cornered wolf. Inside, Martha was packing a basket, not with herbs, but with food, bread, cheese, and 2 flasks of fresh water. For the judge and the marshal, she said, her hands moving with a purpose that belied the tension in her shoulders. It's a long, hard ride to Denver. They're not going to make it to Denver, Sam said, his voice flat. He turned from the porch rail, his face grim. Morrison is going to try and break Aldrich free. He'll hit them on the road, somewhere in the canyons where there's no cover. Martha's hand stilled. You're sure? It's what I would do, Sam said simply. It's their only move left. She looked at him, at the set of his jaw, the quiet deadliness in his eyes. In that moment, she understood. He wasn't just a drifter who was good with a gun. He was a man who understood violence on a deeper level. He thought like a predator. So what do we do? She asked. We don't let them get to the canyons, he said. He checked the cylinders of his Colt, spinning them with an audible click, click, click. We end this here, in town, in the light. A plan, desperate and dangerous, was formed in hushed tones. Word was sent via Pete Winters to the federal marshal. Trust no one. Delay the coach. When the time came, they would be ready. The stagecoach was scheduled to leave at 10. At 1:45, the town square was quiet. Too quiet. The usual morning bustle was gone. Shopkeepers stood nervously in their doorways. Windows were shuttered. Cedar Ridge was a ghost town holding its breath. The marshal brought Aldrich out of the jail, his wrists and ankles shackled. The disgraced mayor looked smaller, shrunken, but his eyes darted around the empty square, searching. He knew something was wrong. As they moved towards the waiting coach, it happened. A gunshot cracked the silence, and a chunk of wood exploded from the coach door, inches from the marshal's head. From the rooftop of the saloon, Jake Morrison appeared, a rifle in his hands. "Let him go, Marshal!" he screamed, his voice high and frantic. "Let him go, or you're a dead man!" At the same time, 4 of Aldrich's hired guns burst from the alleyway next to the general store. Revolvers drawn. The trap was sprung, but they weren't the only ones with a plan. The marshal shoved Aldrich to the ground behind the coach and returned fire. From the doorway of the blacksmith's shop, Sam appeared, both Colts blazing, his shots methodical and precise. One of the gunmen spun around and dropped. Then from the second-story window of the hotel, a rifle barrel appeared. Pete Winters, the old prospector, laid his cheek against the worn stock of his buffalo gun and fired. The heavy-caliber slug hit another gunman in the chest, lifting him off his feet and slamming him into the dust. The quiet square had erupted into a full-blown war zone. Martha was not a bystander. Rifle in hand, she took up a position behind a water trough, her shots aimed not to kill, but to pin down. She fired at the remaining 2 gunmen in the alley, forcing them to take cover, preventing them from getting a clear shot at Sam or the marshal. Morrison, enraged, swung his rifle from the rooftop towards Martha. He saw her, clear as day, a perfect target. He squeezed the trigger, but his shot never came. A cast-iron skillet, thrown with incredible force from an adjacent window, slammed into the side of his head. Morrison crumpled, unconscious, dropping his rifle. In the window stood Mrs. Chen, her face a mask of cold fury. The last two gunmen, seeing their leader down and their numbers dwindling, made a desperate break for it. One ran straight into Sam's line of fire and went down hard. The other, seeing it was over, threw his gun into the dirt and put his hands in the air, screaming, "I give up! Don't shoot!" Silence fell over the square, thick with the smell of gun smoke. It was over in less than a minute. Aldrich, seeing his rescue fail, did the unthinkable. He scrambled up, grabbed the stagecoach driver, a boy no older than 16, and pulled him around as a human shield, pressing the jagged edge of his broken manacle against the boy's throat. "Stay back!" he shrieked, his eyes wild with terror. "I'll kill him! I swear to God, I'll kill him!" The marshal froze. Sam lowered his guns. They were at a stalemate. "Let the boy go, Aldrich," Sam said, his voice calm and even. "It's over. There's nowhere left to run." "It's not over until I'm free," Aldrich screamed, dragging the terrified boy backward. But he had forgotten about Martha. While all eyes were on Aldrich and Sam, she had slipped away from the water trough, circling around the back of the buildings. She emerged from the alley behind him, silent as a ghost. She didn't have a clear shot with the boy in the way, so she didn't use her rifle. She swung it like a club. The heavy wooden stock connected with the back of Aldrich's head with a sickening crack. His eyes rolled up in their sockets, and he collapsed in a heap, releasing the boy, who scrambled away sobbing. Martha stood over the unconscious form of the man who had tormented her town, her rifle held ready, her chest heaving. The people of Cedar Ridge slowly emerged from their hiding places, their faces a mixture of shock, terror, and awe. They had not just witnessed the end of a tyrant, they had participated in it. The prospector, the laundress, the gunslinger, and the mountain woman. They had saved themselves. The marshal walked over, shaking his head in disbelief. He looked at Sam, then at Martha. "In 20 years of law enforcement," he said, his voice gravelly, "I have never seen anything like this. You people," he trailed off, then just shook his head and smiled. "You people are going to be all right." The days that followed were a blur of activity. A new town council was elected, with Pete Winters as its chairman. Thomas Garrett, freed from Aldrich's predatory rates, worked with Sam to establish a new independent freight line. Mrs. Chen was given a contract to be the official laundress for the new council and the marshal's office. Martha, with the town's grateful support, began converting an old abandoned building into a proper clinic and hospital, a place of healing for all. One evening, about a month later, Sam found her sitting on the porch of the cabin, looking out at the stars. The air was cool and clear. The sounds from the town below were different now, not the tense, fearful quiet of before, but the comfortable sounds of a community at peace. Laughter from the saloon, a hammer ringing in the blacksmith's shop, the faint melody of a piano. "It's a good sound," Sam said, leaning against the rail beside her. "Yes," she said softly, "it is." They sat in a comfortable silence for a long time. The 1-year anniversary of their strange, desperate wedding was approaching. The terms of their contract would soon be met. He would be free to go, a rich man, on to whatever life he had planned before he'd sat down on those saloon steps. The thought left a hollow ache in Martha's chest that no herb could cure. "The silver mine is producing more than we ever expected," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "You're 20%. It's a fortune, Sam. You can go anywhere. Do anything." "I know," he said quietly. She finally turned to look at him. "Our agreement is almost up. You've more than earned your share. You're free to go." Sam looked at her, his storm gray eyes unreadable in the moonlight. He reached out and took her hand, his rough fingers lacing through hers. "The agreement was for a partnership," he said. "A marriage in name only. A roof over my head." He paused, his gaze softening. "But it became more than that, didn't it? This isn't just a roof over my head, Martha. This is home. Tears welled in Martha's eyes, blurring the stars. And this, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, is more than a marriage in name only. So I was thinking, Sam said, a slow smile spreading across his face. Maybe we renegotiate the contract. Make it a lifetime partnership. What do you say, Mrs. Hawkins? She didn't need to answer. She just squeezed his hand, and together they sat on the porch of their home, under the vast starry sky, watching over the town they had fought for, the town they had saved, the town they would build together. If you enjoyed this story of courage and justice on the frontier, and you believe that good people should always stand up to bullies, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. And let us know in the comments below. What was the most shocking twist for you? Thanks for watching.